$50,000 in crisp, unbanded hundreds sat stacked on the mahogany desk, promised to anyone who could open the oxidized brass lockbox without triggering the acid vial inside. 25 men in tailored suits and grease-stained overalls had walked in confident and left sweating. They had tried fiber optic scopes, liquid nitrogen, and diamond-tipped drills. Nothing worked. Then a girl who smelled of cheap bleach and exhaustion stepped forward with a lighter and a bottle of white vinegar. She did not want the money. She just wanted them out of her way, so she could mop the floor. Sweat beaded at the bridge of Miller's nose and dropped against the dulled surface of the antique brass lockbox. The sound was lost beneath the high, whining shriek of the diamond-tipped rotary drill. Miller cursed under his breath. The drill bit bound, skipping off the scarred brass collar of the keyhole. A sharp spark shot sideways, singeing the edge of a stack of important shipping manifests. The smell of ozone and burning metal hung heavy in the stifling air of the study. Dominic watched from the leather armchair in the corner. He had not slept in 72 hours. A muscle twitched beneath the dark stubble along his jawline. His tie was loose, his collar open, revealing the faint pale scars at his collarbone. He glanced at the Rolex on his wrist. 11:42, 18 minutes. If that box was not opened by midnight, the ledger inside would remain inaccessible. If the ledger stayed locked away, his brother would face the cartel's firing squad before sunrise. It was a simple, brutal equation, and Dominic felt the weight of it crushing his lungs. He reached for his rocks glass. The scotch was warm. He drank it anyway, letting the burn distract him from the pounding pressure behind his eyes. "It's no use," Miller finally gasped, cutting the power to the drill. The sudden silence rang in everyone's ears. The security contractor pushed his safety goggles up into his thinning hair, leaving red rings around his eyes. "Mr. Rossi, I'm telling you, this isn't a standard pin tumbler. It's a deadlock mechanism wired to a secondary glass vial. The vibration alone is risky. If I apply any more torque to the primary cylinder, the acid drops. The paper inside turns to sludge. I can't bypass it. Nobody can." Dominic did not yell. He did not throw the glass. He simply set it on the side table with a quiet, terrifying click. "You are the 25th man to stand in this room and tell me what cannot be done," Dominic said. His voice was a rasp, low and stripped of emotion. "I brought you in from Chicago because you claimed you could open bank vaults with a paperclip. Now you're beaten by a humidor my grandfather bought in Naples. It's a bespoke acoustic lock, sir. It's not just mechanical. It's... Get out." Miller flinched. He started to reach for his canvas tool bag. "Leave the tools," Dominic's underboss, Caleb, rumbled from his position by the heavy velvet drapes. Caleb was a mountain of a man who always smelled faintly of peppermint and gun oil. He stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the only exit. "Just walk, Miller." Miller swallowed hard and abandoned his gear. He backed out of the room, closing the heavy oak double doors behind him. In the far corner, almost swallowed by the shadows of the towering bookshelves, Suddy squeezed the heavy cotton strings of her mop through the industrial yellow wringer. Murky gray water splashed into the bucket. The sharp tang of industrial ammonia fought a losing battle against the scent of Dominic's cigar smoke and spilled scotch. Suddy's lower back throbbed. A dull, rhythmic ache ran from her spine down to her knees. She had been on her feet since 4 in the morning, scrubbing baseboards in the east wing, only to be dragged into the main study because Caleb demanded the mud tracked in by the parade of failed locksmiths be cleaned up immediately. They treated her like a piece of furniture. Less than furniture. Dominic Rossi at least looked at the leather couch when he sat on it. He had not looked at Suddy once. She dunked the mop again. The cold water bit at the split cuticles on her right hand. She winced, pulling her fingers back and wiping them on the thigh of her faded gray uniform. The uniform was 2 sizes too big, bought at a thrift store and hemmed with safety pins. She did not care about the lockbox. She did not care about the $50,000 stacked neatly beside it on the desk. That kind of money did not feel real. It was cartel money, blood money, ghost money. What was real was the $240 she was short on rent and the fact that she still had 2 hours left on her shift. She pushed the yellow bucket forward. The caster squeaked violently against the hardwood. Dominic's head snapped toward the sound. His dark eyes locked on her, bloodshot and furious. For a second, the sheer violence radiating from him pinned Suddy to the floorboards. She froze, gripping the plastic handle of the mop, so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Do you have to do that right now?" Dominic asked. The exhaustion in his tone was heavy, a physical weight that seemed to drag his shoulders down. Suddy stared at him. She wanted to say, "Your goon told me to clean the mud." She wanted to say, "If I don't finish this room, I don't get cleared to leave." Instead, she just stared at the puddle of muddy water Miller had left near the Persian rug. "No, sir," she whispered. Her voice was raspy from the chemical fumes. "I'll wait." Dominic turned away, dragging a heavy hand down his face. "Caleb," he muttered, "call the guy in Brooklyn, the one with the thermal lance." "Boss, thermal lance will cook the inside of the box in 3 seconds," Caleb argued, stepping away from the door. "Do we have another option?" Dominic slammed his fist down on the armrest. The leather groaned. "Midnight, Caleb. Midnight." Suddy stood perfectly still. The room felt suffocating. She looked past Dominic, past Caleb, straight at the scarred brass box, sitting under the harsh glare of the halogen work light Miller had left behind. The light illuminated the green oxidation on the metal. The thick layer of grime settled into the intricate floral carvings. The 25 experts had looked at it as a masterpiece of mechanical engineering. Suddy, however, looked at things differently. She looked at the world through the lens of dirt, and looking at the heavy brass rosette right next to the keyhole, she noticed something the men with diamond drills had missed. Suddy abandoned the mop handle. It clattered against the lip of the bucket, another loud intrusion into the tense silence of the study. Caleb shot her a venomous glare, his hand instinctively dropping toward the bulge beneath his tailored suit jacket. Suddy ignored him. She wiped her damp, chemical-smelling hands on her apron and stepped toward the mahogany desk. "Hey," Caleb barked, stepping into her path. The scent of peppermint was overpowering now. "Back to the corner, sweetheart. Or better yet, get the hell out of here." "The floor is wet," Suddy said. Her voice was barely a murmur, flat and devoid of the fear Caleb was used to inspiring. She pointed a cracked finger toward the desk. "I need to dry the perimeter of the rug before the ammonia eats the silk." It was a lie, but a plausible one. Caleb glanced at Dominic, seeking an order. Dominic was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. He did not wave her off. He did not even seem to hear her. Suddy stepped around Caleb's massive frame. She moved into the pool of harsh white light, cast by the halogen lamp. Up close, the lockbox smelled like old copper pennies and damp pine. The heat radiating from the lamp was intense. She pulled a microfiber rag from her back pocket and knelt, pretending to dab at a scuff mark on the wood floor near the desk's carved legs. Her eyes, however, were fixed on the box above her. The 25 locksmiths had focused all their attention on the primary keyhole, a deep, complex cylinder filled with tiny brass pins. They had scratched the metal around it, trying to pick it, trying to force it, but Suddy's gaze drifted an inch to the right, to the decorative brass rosette molded to look like a blooming lotus. In the harsh light, she saw it. The keyhole had a faint ring of pale, untouched brass around its inner lip, meaning a key had gone in and out of it recently, polishing the metal through friction. But the rosette was crusted in a hardened amber-colored residue. It was not rust. It was not oxidation. It was spilled caramelized liquor and decades of cigar resin, seeped into a hairline seam and crystallized into cement. She stood up slowly. "You're working on the wrong part," she said. The words slipped out before she could stop them. They sounded absurdly loud in the cavernous room. Dominic's hands dropped from his face. He stared at her. His dark, bloodshot eyes narrowed, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A maid. A girl in an oversized uniform, with messy hair and bleach-stained shoes. "What did you just say?" Dominic asked. The danger in his voice was no longer a dull hum. It was a sharpened blade. "I said you're working on the wrong part," Suddy repeated, her throat feeling like dry cardboard. She did not back down. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She pointed at the box. "That keyhole is fake. It's a decoy." Caleb let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Right. Okay. The girl with the mop is an acoustic engineering expert." He moved toward her. "Boss, I'm getting her out of here." He reached out, thick fingers closing around Suddy's upper arm with bruising force. "Don't touch me," Suddy snapped, jerking away. The sudden bite in her voice surprised even her. She looked at Dominic and held his gaze. "The keyhole is a decoy. There's no friction wear on the inner pins. Whoever owns this hasn't put a key in there in 50 years. But that decorative lotus flower next to it? It has a micro seam around the petals. It's a pressure plate. It's supposed to depress, but it can't." Dominic slowly stood up. He was tall, dominating the space, moving with a predatory grace despite his exhaustion. He walked over to the desk, looked down at the box, then at her. "Why can't it?" "Because it's glued shut," Suddy said. "Someone spilled cognac or brandy on it decades ago. Mixed with the cigar smoke in this house, the sugar crystallized. It's basically cemented the pressure plate to the outer casing. Your guys were trying to pick a solid block of brass. They could have drilled that keyhole all night. It would never open." Dominic stared at the brass rosette. Then he looked back at Suddy. "And how do you know this?" "Because I scrub dried liquor off your baseboards every Tuesday," she said bluntly. Silence stretched. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed the quarter hour. 11:45. "Can you open it?" Dominic asked. "Boss, you can't be serious," Caleb protested. "Miller just said any torque could drop the acid." "Can you open it?" Dominic repeated, ignoring his underboss. Suddy looked at the $50,000. She did not want it. She just wanted to prove to the men in the room that they were idiots. She reached into the deep pocket of her apron and pulled out a small plastic spray bottle and a cheap cigarette lighter. "It doesn't need torque," Suddy said. "It needs heat and an acid base to eat the sugar." Before Caleb could draw his weapon, before Dominic could stop her, Suddy unscrewed the cap of her spray bottle. It was undiluted white vinegar, her secret for lifting hard water stains. She poured exactly 3 drops over the brass lotus, the liquid wicked into the microscopic seam. Then she struck the lighter. She held the small orange flame a quarter inch above the brass, directly over the vinegar. The liquid hissed. The smell of boiling vinegar and burnt sugar filled the air, acrid and sharp. She held it there for 10 seconds, then 20, then 30. The brass began to weep, a sticky, dark brown sludge as the crystallized resin melted. Suddy clicked the lighter off. She did not use a tool. She did not use a diamond drill. She wrapped the hem of her thick cotton apron around her thumb to protect it from the hot metal, pressed her thumb directly onto the center of a lotus flower, and pushed hard. A loud, resonant clack echoed through the room. Internal latches disengaged like a series of heavy dominoes falling. The heavy brass lid popped open a fraction of an inch, releasing the dry, musty scent of ancient paper into the room. Suddy stepped back, wiping her thumb on her apron. She looked at Dominic. Dominic Rossi was utterly, completely speechless. He stared at the open box, then slowly lifted his eyes to the exhausted, bleach-smelling girl standing in front of him. For the first time in his life, the boss of the city had nothing to say. Silence stretched until it became a physical pressure in the room, heavy and suffocating. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked a rhythmic metallic pulse that seemed perfectly synced with the throbbing vein at Dominic's temple. He did not blink. He just stared at the sliver of darkness between the heavy brass lid and the lip of the antique box. Slowly, as if approaching a live explosive, Dominic reached out. His knuckles were white. He pushed the lid back. It shrieked softly on dry hinges, a sound like scraping bone. Inside, resting on a bed of faded, moth-eaten velvet, lay a small black leather ledger. It was ordinary, unremarkable. Its edges were frayed. The leather cracked from age and neglect, yet the air in the room seemed to shift the moment it was exposed, drawing all the oxygen toward that little black book. Dominic picked it up. He did not open it immediately. He held it in both hands, his broad shoulders dropping a fraction as a breath he had been holding for 3 days finally shuddered out of his lungs. The faint metallic scent of adrenaline mixed with the lingering cloud of burnt sugar and vinegar. "Caleb," Dominic said. His voice was a rasp barely audible over the hum of the halogen work light. "Yeah, boss. Call Gabriel. Tell him we have the routing numbers. Tell him to pull the transfer to the cartel account immediately." Caleb did not argue. He did not hesitate. He pulled a burner phone from his breast pocket, the scent of peppermint and gun oil flaring briefly as he moved, and stepped out into the dark, cavernous hallway to make the call. Suddy stood by the desk, her thumb stinging where the hot brass had burned her skin. She curled her fingers inward, hiding the red blistering mark against the rough cotton of her apron. She did not look at the ledger. She did not look at Dominic. She looked at the yellow plastic mop bucket, sitting awkwardly by the Persian rug, the gray water perfectly still. "I need to finish the floors in the East Wing," Suddy said. Her voice broke the spell. Dominic snapped his head up, dark bloodshot eyes locking on her. He looked at her as though she had dropped out of the ceiling. He took in her thrift store uniform, the safety pins glinting under the harsh light, her scuffed rubber-soled shoes coated in dust and dried floor wax. "You want a mop?" Dominic said. It was not a question. It was a flat, disbelieving echo of her words. "My shift ends at 2 o'clock, Suddy said. Throat tight. Panic, cold and sharp, began to gnaw at the edges of her stomach. She had made a mistake. She had stepped out of the background. Maids were supposed to be ghosts. Ghosts did not humiliate highly paid security contractors. Ghosts did not save Mafia bosses from cartel firing squads. If I don't finish the East Wing, the staffing agency docks my pay for the entire night. Dominic stared at her. He set the black ledger down on the mahogany desk, beside the neat banded stacks of $100 bills. "Take it," he said, gesturing toward the cash. "That was the bounty. You opened the box. It's yours." Suddy looked at the money. It was more than she had ever seen in her life. Crisp, neatly stacked, the pale green ink stark against the dark wood of the desk. To a girl short on rent, it should have looked like salvation. Instead, it looked like a trap. "No," Suddy said. Dominic's jaw tightened. "Excuse me. I don't want it." She took a step back, her wet shoes squeaking softly on the hardwood. "I just wanted your guy to stop drilling, so I could clean the mud and go home." "It's $50,000, Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave into that dangerous, quiet edge again. He was not used to being told no. He was not used to people turning down his money. "You're wearing a uniform held together by safety pins and smelling like industrial bleach. Don't play proud with me. Take the money." Suddy's chest flared with a sudden hot spike of irritation. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion and anger. "I'm not playing proud," she snapped, the words spilling out before her survival instincts could stop them. "I'm playing smart. What exactly do you expect me to do with 50 grand in cash? If I deposit it, the IRS flags it. If I try to pay my rent with a stack of unbanded hundreds, my landlord calls the cops because he thinks I'm dealing. I ride the night bus back to a neighborhood where people get stabbed over a pair of shoes. If I walk out of here with that in my backpack, I'm dead before Tuesday." Dominic went still. He studied her. The irritation in his eyes faded, replaced by a sharp, calculating intensity that made Suddy's skin crawl. He was actually looking at her now, not as a maid, not as a fixture in the room, but as a puzzle he could not quite solve. "So you opened a deadlocked vault just to speed up your janitorial duties," he said softly. "Yes. No. Lying. I'm short on rent," Suddy blurted out. The indignity of the truth tasted like ash in her mouth. She hated him in that moment. She hated his tailored suit, his warm scotch, his mahogany desk. "I need $240 by tomorrow morning, or I get evicted. That's what I need. Not your cartel money. Not your ghost money. Just enough to keep my landlord from changing the locks." Dominic reached across the desk. His large, calloused hand bypassed the tall stacks of hundreds entirely. He picked up a loose, unbanded stack resting near his rocks glass. With slow, deliberate movements, he peeled off 3 crisp $100 bills. The thick paper rasped against his thumb. He held them out to her. Suddy did not move. The hum of the halogen lamp felt deafening. She looked at the green paper, then up at his face. The dark stubble on his jaw caught the harsh light, highlighting the deep, exhausted lines around his mouth. 300, Dominic said, his tone completely devoid of mockery. "It covers the $240 for your rent, plus cab fare, so you do not have to ride the night bus with cartel money." Suddy hesitated. Her burned thumb throbbed. Her back ached. She stepped forward and reached out with her left hand. Her fingers brushed his palm as she took the bills. His skin was surprisingly warm, rough with calluses that did not belong on a man who sat behind a mahogany desk. The brief contact sent a jolt up her arm, sharp and unsettling. She quickly pulled her hand back, folded the stiff bills, and shoved them deep into the front pocket of her damp apron. "Thank you," she muttered, eyes dropping to the floor. She turned toward the yellow mop bucket, desperate to put distance between them. "What's your name?" Dominic asked. Suddy froze, hand hovering over the plastic handle of the mop. "You don't need to know that." "You just saved my brother's life," Dominic said. The words were quiet, but they carried a massive, undeniable weight in the silent room. "I think I've earned a name." "Suddy," she said to the wall. "Sadie," Dominic repeated, testing the name, the syllables rolling rough and slow over his tongue. "It's Suddy. You're wasting your time scrubbing baseboards, Suddy. It pays the bills. Usually." She grabbed the mop handle. It was gritty, coated in dried residue from cheap cleaning chemicals. She yanked the bucket backward, the casters shrieking violently against the wood floor. The heavy oak doors swung open before she could reach them. Caleb stepped back into the study. The massive underboss looked drained. The aggressive posture he usually carried melted out of his shoulders. "It's done," Caleb said, looking directly at Dominic. He ignored Suddy completely. Gabriel intercepted the transfer. The cartel confirmed receipt. "Leo is walking out of the warehouse in Tijuana right now. He's safe." Dominic closed his eyes for a long, slow second. A deep shudder of relief washed over his face, erasing the predatory edge that had defined him for the last 3 days. When he opened his eyes again, they found Suddy. "Let her go, Caleb," Dominic ordered. Caleb frowned, noticing Suddy near the door with her bucket. "Boss, she heard too much. She saw the ledger. We can't just let some staffing agency temp walk out the front door." "I said let her go." The dangerous edge was back in Dominic's voice, sharp enough to cut glass. "She doesn't know what she saw. And if anyone asks, she was cleaning mud." Caleb shifted his weight, hand resting near his jacket. He looked at Suddy, eyes cold and assessing. Then he stepped aside, leaving the doorway clear. Suddy did not run. Every nerve ending in her body screamed at her to sprint. But she pushed the heavy yellow bucket through the massive oak doors, the plastic wheels thudding over the thick threshold. She walked down the long, dimly lit corridor of the mansion, the plush carpet absorbing the sound of her scuffed shoes. She pushed through the heavy service doors leading to the rear kitchens, abandoning the bucket by the industrial sinks. She did not bother going to the east wing. She stripped off the heavy cotton apron, leaving it in a crumpled heap on a stainless steel prep table. The smell of vinegar and burnt sugar still clung to her skin, deeply embedded in the pores of her hands. She walked out the back service door into the biting cold of the November night. The air was sharp, smelling of wet asphalt and distant exhaust, a stark contrast to the stifling, expensive scents of the mansion. Suddy dug her hands into the pockets of her thin thrift store jacket. Her fingers brushed against the crisp, stiff edges of the $300 bills. $300. She had her rent. She had a cab ride home. She had survived. She walked down the long asphalt driveway, her shadow stretching long and distorted beneath the yellow glow of the security lights. Gravel crunched under her feet. She told herself she was safe. She told herself that tomorrow she would go to the staffing agency, ask for a different route, and never think about the scarred brass lockbox or the exhausted man in the tailored suit again. But as she reached the heavy wrought iron security gates at the edge of the property, a sleek black sedan pulled up quietly alongside her. The passenger window rolled down with a soft mechanical hum. Caleb sat in the driver's seat. He was not looking at her. He stared straight ahead at the dark, empty road. "Mr. Rossi doesn't like loose ends," Caleb said, his voice flat. "And he doesn't like people who outsmart his security contractors." He reached across the center console and tossed a small, thick piece of cardstock out the window. It fluttered in the cold air, landing face up on the wet asphalt near Suddy's shoe. "Be at that address tomorrow at noon," Caleb said. "Don't bring the mop." The window rolled up. The sedan accelerated, tail lights bleeding red into the darkness. before disappearing around the bend. Suddy stood shivering in the cold. She looked down at the wet asphalt. There was a matte black business card lying near her toe. No name, no logo, just a street address in the financial district and a suite number embossed in dark gray ink. She knew she should not pick it up. Picking it up meant crossing a line she could never uncross. But the smell of vinegar was still on her hands, and the memory of Dominic Rossi's eyes calculating, seeing right through her invisibility, was burned into her mind. Suddy knelt on the wet ground and picked up the card. Morning arrived with the relentless hammering of the radiator pipe in the corner of Suddy's studio apartment. The noise was a daily feature, accompanied by the faint metallic scent of rust and boiling dust. She lay on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, where water stains mapped out continents that did not exist. Her right thumb throbbed beneath a cheap plastic bandage. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the heavy brass lid of the lockbox falling open and felt the sudden, terrifying weight of Dominic Rossi's calculating gaze, pinning her to the floorboards. By 8 o'clock, she was standing in the cramped, sour-smelling hallway of her building, knocking on her landlord's door. Jenkins opened it wearing a stained undershirt, the smell of stale beer and cheap cigars rolling out of his apartment in a visible wave. Suddy did not speak. She simply handed him the 3 crisp, unbanded $100 bills. Jenkins blinked, his greasy forehead wrinkling as he looked from the money to her pale, exhausted face. He checked the watermarks, his thick fingers leaving faint oily smudges on the clean paper, then grunted and shut the door in her face. No receipt. No thank you. Just the sharp click of a deadbolt, sliding into place. Suddy walked back to her room. She sat on the edge of the mattress and pulled the matte black business card from her thrift store jacket pocket. It was heavy cardstock, expensive. Running her uninjured thumb over the surface, she felt the subtle indentation of the dark gray ink, a street address, a suite number, noon. She glanced at her digital clock. 9:40. If she went to the staffing agency right now, she could beg for a daytime shift, scrubbing toilets at the municipal courthouse or mopping the sticky floors of a discount cinema. She would go back to being a ghost. She would be safe. But her stomach clenched at the thought of the harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of industrial bleach, the aching void in her lower back, and the pathetic realization that next month she would be standing in front of Jenkins's door all over again, short on rent, praying for a miracle. She did not want a miracle. She wanted control. At 10:30, she walked out into the biting November wind. The subway ride downtown was a sensory assault. The train car smelled of damp wool, ozone, and old garlic. Suddy sat stiffly, her hands wedged between her knees, listening to the agonizing screech of metal wheels against the tracks. She watched the people around her, tired commuters staring blankly at their phones, avoiding eye contact, existing in their own isolated bubbles. Yesterday she had been exactly like them. Today the $300 in her pocket felt like a severing of a tether. She was drifting into dangerous waters, and she knew exactly how fast the current was moving. She emerged from the underground station into the financial district. The contrast was physically jarring. The buildings were sheer cliffs of glass and steel, slicing into the gray winter sky. The wind whipping off the river was colder here, funneled through the concrete canyons with a sharp, howling intensity. There was no trash on the sidewalks, no grime. Everything was polished, sleek, and fiercely intimidating. Suddy found the address. It was a towering skyscraper with a lobby clad in imported black marble. It looked less like an office building and more like a mausoleum for hedge funds. She pushed through the heavy revolving doors, instantly enveloped by the scent of expensive HVAC systems and faint citrus-infused floor wax. She approached the security desk. The guard, a man in a sharp suit with an earpiece, looked up. His eyes swept quickly over her faded jacket, her scuffed shoes, her messy hair. He opened his mouth to ask for a delivery slip, assuming she was a courier who had lost her way. "Suite 4400, Suddy said, her voice dry and raspy. The guard frowned, typing something into his terminal. He paused. He looked back up at her, the mild annoyance in his eyes replaced by sudden rigid professionalism. "Name, Suddy." The guard did not ask for a last name. He simply reached under his desk and pulled out a blank, white magnetic key card. He slid it across the polished granite counter. Express elevator bank on the left. Last car. It will take you straight up. Suddy took the card. The plastic was cool against her skin. She walked toward the elevators, her scuffed rubber soles squeaking faintly against the marble. It was a tiny sound, a microscopic rebellion against the oppressive silence of the lobby. She stepped into the polished chrome box, swiped the card, and felt her stomach drop as the elevator shot upward, carrying her away from the ground, away from the dirt, and straight into the stratosphere of Dominic Rossi's world, 44 floors above the chaotic churn of the city. The silence was absolute. It was the kind of expensive, engineered quiet that made Suddy's ears ring. The elevator doors parted with a soft pneumatic hiss, revealing a reception area devoid of a receptionist. Instead, Caleb stood by a massive floor-to-ceiling window, his broad shoulders blocking out a significant portion of the skyline. He wore a different suit today, charcoal gray and impeccably tailored, but the faint underlying scent of peppermint and gun oil was the same. He turned as she stepped off the elevator. He did not smile. He did not offer a greeting. He just gave her a slow, assessing look, as if searching for a weapon hidden in the oversized pockets of her jacket. "He's waiting," Caleb rumbled, gesturing toward a set of heavy frosted glass doors at the end of a short corridor. Suddy did not wait for him to lead the way. She walked past him, ignoring the instinct to shrink away from his sheer physical size. She pushed open the glass doors and stepped into the main office. The room was vast, smelling of rich espresso and old leather. There were no bookshelves or antique lockboxes here. The space was hyper-modern, dominated by a massive live-edge walnut desk and panoramic views of the river. Dominic sat behind the desk. He looked different in daylight. The crushing exhaustion that had weighed him down the previous night was gone, replaced by coiled electric energy. He was clean-shaven, dressed in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms, corded with lean muscle. He was looking at a sleek tablet, a half-empty espresso cup resting near his hand. He did not look up immediately. He let her stand there, letting the sheer scale of the room and his absolute authority wash over her. Suddy refused to fidget. She crossed her arms over her chest, dug her nails into the fabric of her jacket, and waited. Finally, Dominic tapped the screen of his tablet and raised his dark eyes. They locked onto hers, sharp and unreadable. "You didn't bring them up," Dominic noted, his voice smooth, devoid of the dangerous rasp from the night before. "You told me not to," Suddy replied, keeping her tone perfectly flat. "Though, looking at the streaks on your windows, your window washers are using too much ammonia in their solution. It leaves a film." A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of Dominic's mouth. It was gone a second later. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Have a seat, Suddy." She walked forward and sat in one of the low, uncomfortable designer chairs opposite his desk. The leather was cold. "You're wondering why you're here," Dominic said. "I assume you did not come up here for cleaning advice." "I have 3 forensic accountants on retainer," Dominic continued, ignoring her dry remark. "I pay them exorbitant amounts of money to look at spreadsheets, routing numbers, and tax codes. For the last 6 months, one of my front companies, a high-end restaurant in Midtown, has been bleeding cash. Slow, steady hemorrhage. My accountants assure me the books are perfect. My security team assures me the vault is secure. The managers are loyal, yet the money keeps vanishing." Suddy frowned, the internal contradiction catching her attention. "If the books are perfect, how do you know it's bleeding?" "Because I know how much liquor they pour, and I know how many steaks they order," Dominic said, his voice dropping into a low, deadly register. "The physical reality does not match the digital one. Someone is skimming, and they're doing it with such precision that my experts can't find the hole in the bucket." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the walnut desk. The intensity radiating from him was palpable, a physical force pressing against her chest. "Last night, I watched 25 of the best security engineers in the country stare at a brass box and tell me it was impossible," Dominic continued. "They looked at the mechanics. They looked at the design. They missed the crystallized sugar because they don't know what dirt looks like. You do." Suddy felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "You want me to look at your restaurant?" I want you to get hired as a night cleaner, Dominic corrected. I want you to be invisible. I want you to walk through the kitchens, the stockrooms, the manager's office. I want you to look at the trash, the wear patterns on the floor, the inventory that doesn't smell right. You see the things people try to wipe away. I need you to find my leak. I'm a maid, Suddy said, her voice tight, the danger suddenly crystal clear. I clean up mud. I don't hunt thieves for the Mafia. You are an analyst who uses a mop, Dominic said smoothly. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick white envelope. He tossed it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy, substantial thud. 10,000 just to look. If you find the leak, I'll multiply it by 5. You'll never have to worry about a landlord or a late bus again. Suddy stared at the envelope. The smell of espresso suddenly felt nauseatingly rich. 50,000. Real money this time. Clean money. But the price was stepping entirely out of the shadows and into the crosshairs of whoever was brave enough to steal from Dominic Rossi. She looked up from the envelope and met his unwavering gaze. She knew she should walk away. The survival instinct that had kept her alive on the streets screamed at her to run. Slowly, her burned thumb aching in rhythm with her heartbeat, Suddy reached across the desk and pulled the envelope toward her. The crisp edges bit into her palm. She did not open it. She did not need to count it to know the weight of $10,000. It felt dangerously heavy, a dense anchor threatening to drag her straight to the bottom of the river. Dominic Rossi watched from his 44th floor window. She shoved the envelope deep into the inner pocket of her thrift store jacket, keeping her hand pressed flat against it. I start tonight, Suddy said. Dominic did not smile, but a shadow of approval shifted in his dark eyes. He picked up his tablet, dismissing her with the seamless grace of a man who owned the world and everyone in it. Caleb will give you the address. Don't be late. And Suddy. He paused, looking back up as the harsh midday light poured through the glass. Don't get caught. By midnight, the air inside Aura, Dominic's flagship restaurant in Midtown, smelled of bruised basil, charred Wagyu fat, and the sharp sour tang of spilled champagne. The dinner rush had ended hours ago. The sous chefs had wiped down their stations. The floor managers had locked the registers, and the echoing cavernous space belonged entirely to the night crew. Suddy wore a new uniform. It was not held together by safety pins, but it was just as shapeless. A stiff dark blue polyester tunic that scratched mercilessly at her collarbone. The fabric smelled faintly of formaldehyde from a factory wrapping. She pushed a heavy gray industrial utility cart down the narrow hallway, connecting the main kitchen to the rear loading dock. Her cover was perfect, a staffing agency temp assigned to cover a sudden vacancy. Trent, the polished, perpetually sweating general manager of Aura, had barely looked at her when she arrived. He had pointed a manicured finger toward the utility closet, muttered something about not using abrasive pads on the imported marble bar, and walked away. To Trent, and to the remaining kitchen prep staff, Suddy was a ghost. She was a mop, a rag, a bucket of degreaser. She was the invisible machinery that reset their world for the next day. Suddy used that invisibility. She started in the main dining room. She did not look for hidden safes or USB drives. She looked at the physical footprint of the room. Forensic accountants looked at numbers on a screen. Suddy looked at the dust under the wine racks. She noticed that the digital inventory manifest, pinned to the stockroom clipboard, claimed 40 bottles of a specific vintage Bordeaux had been sold that week. Yet when Suddy emptied the glass recycling bins, separating the clear from the green, she counted the corks and the heavy punted bottoms of the broken bottles. There were only 22. A digital ledger could be hacked, manipulated, or balanced with phantom numbers. But glass was physical. It took up space. It had weight. She moved to the kitchen, her scuffed rubber soles silent on the red quarry tile. The massive stainless steel prep tables gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights. Suddy wiped them down with a mixture of hot water and quaternary sanitizer, the chemical smell burning the inside of her nose. She watched the people who lingered. She watched the prep cook who stayed an hour past his shift, supposedly deep cleaning the meat slicer, but spending more time glancing toward the walk-in refrigerator. She watched the loading dock security guard who spent exactly 14 minutes every night in the alleyway smoking a cigarette, leaving the heavy steel service doors propped open with a rubber wedge. But it was not until 2 a.m., when she reached the narrow corridor housing the commercial laundry bins, that the physical reality of the theft snapped into focus. Aura used a premium linen service. The tablecloths and napkins were heavy Egyptian cotton. At the end of the night, the busboy stripped the dining room and shoved the soiled linens into massive wheeled canvas hampers near the back exit, waiting for the morning truck. Suddy sprayed a rag with stainless steel polish and began wiping the exterior of the walk-in freezer door, positioning herself so she could see the hampers in the reflection of the polished metal. Trent, the general manager, emerged from his glass-walled office. He had taken off his suit jacket. His tie was loose. He did not look like a man finishing a shift. He looked like a man executing a quiet, stressful task. He walked quickly down the hall, looking over his shoulder. He bypassed the kitchen entirely and went straight to the walk-in refrigerator. He emerged a minute later, pushing a small utility cart. On it sat 3 large, opaque white plastic tubs, the kind used for storing bulk rendering fat. Suddy kept her head down, scrubbing a non-existent stain on the freezer handle. Her pulse hammered a dry rhythm against her collarbone. Trent did not take the tubs to the waste disposal chute. He pushed the cart directly to the heavy canvas linen hampers. With practiced, frantic efficiency, he unlatched the lids of the white tubs. Even from 15 feet away, Suddy recognized the dark marbled brick of vacuum-sealed Wagyu beef and the unmistakable soil-heavy scent of raw white truffles piercing through the smell of bleach. Trent buried the sealed packages deep into the center of the soiled linens, piling wine-stained napkins and heavy tablecloths over the stolen inventory. He was not hacking a bank account. He was not skimming the register. He was hiding tens of thousands of dollars of premium, untraceable ingredients in dirty laundry. The linen company truck would pick up the hampers at 5 a.m., bypassing security entirely because nobody checks the dirty napkins. The truck driver, clearly paid off, would divert the goods to the black market before delivering the actual laundry to the cleaners. The digital inventory would simply log the missing food as kitchen spoilage or prep waste. Suddy lowered her rag. The chemical burn in her nose faded, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of realization. Dominic Rossi's 25 experts had failed because they were looking up at the data. They should have been looking down at the dirt. Fluorescent lights hummed with a sickening yellow pitch in the empty dining room of Aura. It was 4:15 a.m. The street sweepers were rumbling down the avenue outside, the heavy brushes vibrating the thick plate glass windows. Dominic Rossi sat alone in a curved leather booth in the darkest corner of the restaurant. He wore a heavy wool overcoat over a dark sweater, blending seamlessly into the shadows. He did not have an espresso this time. A single rocks glass of amber liquid sat untouched on the pristine white linen tablecloth in front of him. He had received a text message from an untraceable burner phone 20 minutes ago. Just an address and a time. The heavy oak doors swinging into the kitchen pushed open with a soft sigh. Suddy walked out into the dining room. She was still wearing the stiff dark blue polyester uniform, but she had taken off her apron. Her hair was pulled back into a messy utilitarian knot, strands sticking to her forehead with dried sweat. She looked exhausted, her shoulders carrying the familiar ache of a 10-hour shift on hard quarry tile. She did not approach him with the hesitant, terrified deference of his subordinates. She walked with flat, heavy-footed pragmatism. In her left hand she dragged a large industrial black trash bag. It made a sickening wet scraping sound against the imported hardwood floor. Dominic's eyes tracked the bag, a muscle feathering along his jawline. Suddy reached the booth. She did not sit. She hoisted the heavy black bag, with a sharp grunt of effort, and dropped it directly onto the center of the pristine table. The heavy crystal rocks glass rattled. The fine Egyptian cotton tablecloth instantly absorbed a dark wet stain from the bottom of the plastic bag. "What is this?" Dominic asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that barely disturbed the quiet of the room. He looked at the leaking bag, then slowly up to her face. "That," Suddy said, breathing slightly uneven, "is your leak." She reached out, dug her fingers into the tough plastic, and ripped a massive tear down the side of the bag. The pungent, earthy smell of white truffles exploded into the stale air, immediately clashing with the scent of Dominic's scotch. Mixed with the truffles were heavy vacuum-sealed bricks of premium Wagyu beef, 4 bottles of vintage Roman County wine, and 2 large unmarked tins of beluga caviar. All of it was tangled in a heap of wine-stained dirty napkins and damp tablecloths. Dominic did not flinch. He did not gasp. He simply stared at the pile of raw fortune sitting in the middle of his elegant dining room. He reached out his large calloused hand, brushing past a stained napkin to pick up one of the heavy bricks of meat. He looked at the inventory barcodes stamped on the plastic. "They log it as spoilage in the computer," Suddy explained, her voice devoid of triumph. She sounded like she was reading a weather report. "Or they claim the wine bottles were dropped and broken during service. The digital books balance perfectly because the system is told the product is gone, but it doesn't go in the dumpster. The dumpster is checked by your security guards." Dominic set the meat down slowly. "The linen service. Trent packs the hampers at 2 o'clock in the morning," Suddy confirmed, crossing her arms over her chest to hide the slight tremor in her hands. "The dirty laundry goes out the back door at 5 a.m. Security waves the truck right through. Nobody inspects a 200-pound canvas cart full of sour-smelling wet towels. The driver drops the food at a secondary location before heading to the industrial cleaners. Trent is skimming $30,000 of physical product a week right past your cameras." Silence fell over the table. The only sound was the distant wail of a siren bleeding through the thick windows. Dominic pulled a crisp white handkerchief from his overcoat pocket and methodically wiped the condensation and raw meat residue from his fingers. He did not look angry. If anything, the deep, exhausted lines around his eyes seemed to ease, replaced by a cold, terrifying focus. "My accountant spent 6 months running algorithms to find a phantom bank account," Dominic murmured, almost to himself. He tossed the soiled handkerchief onto the pile of stolen goods. "And you found in 4 hours. Your accountants don't know what it feels like to haul 50 pounds of wet linen," Suddy said flatly. "They don't know the physical weight of things. When you spend your life cleaning up after people, you learn that nobody ever looks at the trash. It's the ultimate blind spot." Dominic finally looked up at her. The dynamic in the air shifted, heavy and electric. He was not looking at a maid anymore. He was not looking at a temporary asset. He was looking at a woman who understood the ugly, grinding mechanics of reality better than anyone on his payroll. "Trent is a dead man," Dominic said casually, stating a fact rather than making a threat. "The linen driver won't make it to sunrise." Suddy's stomach plummeted. The brutal reality of Dominic's world crashed through the satisfaction of solving the puzzle. She had just signed Trent's death warrant. She swallowed hard, tasting the bitter tang of ozone and stale adrenaline. "That's your business," Suddy said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. She took a step back, her wet rubber shoes squeaking faintly. "I did the job. I found the leak. We're done." "Are we?" Dominic asked. He stood slowly. He was a foot taller than her, his presence utterly dominating the space. He did not move toward her, but the sheer gravity of his posture made Suddy feel pinned to the floor. He reached into the inner pocket of his overcoat and pulled out a thick banded stack of $100 bills. Not an envelope this time, just raw, unhidden cash. $50,000. He tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud beside the ruined truffles. "You think this is the only blind spot I have?" Dominic asked, his voice dropping into a register that felt intimately dangerous. "My world is full of experts who only see what they are trained to see. They look at the ceiling. They never look at the floor." Suddy stared at the money. It was enough to move to a different city, enough to disappear. But looking into Dominic Rossi's eyes, she knew the terrifying truth. You cannot disappear from a man who knows exactly how to look in the shadows. She had stepped out of the background, and now he was never going to let her return to it. The $50,000 sat on the ruined Egyptian cotton, resting against a leaking package of raw beef and a mound of damp, sour-smelling napkins. Suddy stared at the thick paper band holding the hundreds together. It did not look like salvation anymore. It looked exactly like a heavy, perfectly fitted iron collar. Dominic did not crowd her. He remained on his side of the table. His hand slipped casually into the pockets of his heavy wool overcoat, the faint high-pitched whine of a street sweeper making its second pass outside vibrated through the thick plate glass, rattling the empty crystal rocks, glass a fraction of an inch. "I don't want to work for you," Suddy said. Her voice cracked on the last word. Her throat felt coated in dust and dried bleach. "Everyone works for me," Dominic replied softly. "Most of them just don't know it. The staffing agency that docks your pay. I own the shell corporation that signs their lease. The landlord you paid this morning. He pays protection money to my lieutenants so his building doesn't burn down. You've been living in my house your whole life. I'm just inviting you into the dining room." Suddy dragged her gaze away from the cash and looked at him. The suffocating scale of his reach pressed down on her lungs. She dug her fingernails into the rough polyester of her tunic. It was a cheap synthetic material that trapped her body heat and chafed against her collarbone. "I found your stolen meat," she said, her chest heaving in shallow, irregular breaths. "I proved your point. You can hire 20 new security firms to watch the floor instead of the ceiling. You don't need a maid." "I don't need a maid," Dominic agreed, stepping out of the shadow of the booth. The harsh fluorescent lighting caught the sharp angles of his face. "I need an auditor who understands the physical reality of dirt. My accountants look at spreadsheets and see numbers that balance. My enforcers look at men like Trent and see fear, assuming it means loyalty. They are all blinded by their own expertise." He gestured toward the rotting pile of luxury goods on the table. "You walked into my flagship restaurant, a place designed to overwhelm the senses, and you ignored the marble. You ignored the wine lists. You looked at the trash. You counted the broken glass. You noticed the wear patterns." Dominic took a slow step toward her. The scent of his expensive dry cedar cologne pushed back against the overwhelming odor of white truffles. "You see the seams where the world actually holds together. And more importantly, you see where it's fraying." Suddy took a step back, her scuffed rubber shoe squeaking violently against the hardwood. Panic, cold and sharp, coiled in her stomach. She thought of Trent sweating in the back office, completely unaware that the heavy canvas laundry carts he had packed 2 hours ago were currently sealing his fate. "You're going to kill him," she whispered. "Yes." Dominic did not blink. He did not offer a justification or a comfortable lie. "Trent stole from my family. He broke the fundamental rule of our ecosystem. Consequences in my world are not conceptual. They are physical, and they are final." Suddy swallowed hard. A wave of nausea hit her, hot and acidic. She closed her eyes for a brief second, trying to block out the sight of the raw marbled meat and the stack of cartel money. She was a girl who scrubbed baseboards. She took the night bus. She worried about eviction notices and the fluctuating price of eggs. She had no business standing in the crosshairs of a Mafia execution. But as she opened her eyes, she realized the terrifying truth. The old world was already gone. Jenkins, her landlord, had taken the $300 without a word, but he would be back on the first of the month drunk and demanding more. The staffing agency would send her to another fluorescent-lit hallway to ruin her knees for minimum wage. That life was a slow, grinding death. Dominic Rossi was offering a different kind of death, but at least this one paid up front. The heavy oak doors to the kitchen swung open. Caleb stepped into the dining room. He stopped abruptly, his massive frame going perfectly still as his eyes fell on the table. He looked at the leaking trash bag, the vacuum-sealed Wagyu, the truffles, and finally the $50,000. He did not ask a single question. The raw intelligence behind his brutal exterior processed the scene in 3 seconds. He looked at Suddy, and for the first time since she had met him, the condescension in his eyes was completely gone. It was replaced by a cold, guarded respect. "Boss," Caleb rumbled, keeping his voice low. The linen truck just pulled into the alley. Dominic did not look at his underboss. His dark eyes remained locked on Suddy. "Handle the driver. Send a crew to Trent's apartment. Don't make a mess." "Understood." Caleb turned and disappeared back through the swinging doors. Suddy flinched at the casual administration of violence. It was an invoice being processed, a line item being crossed out. "Pick it up, Suddy," Dominic said, his voice dropping into a quiet, absolute command. She stood frozen for a long moment. Her burned thumb throbbed beneath the cheap plastic bandage. Her lower back ached with the familiar dull pain of a 10-hour shift. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out. Her fingers brushed the damp, wine-stained cotton of the tablecloth as she grabbed the thick stack of bills. The paper was cold. It was heavy. She shoved it deep into the pocket of her cheap jacket. "I need a different uniform," Suddy said, her voice flat and entirely drained of emotion. "This polyester gives me a rash." A faint, dangerous smile finally broke across Dominic's face. He reached into his coat and pulled out a sleek matte black burner phone, placing it on the edge of the table where the money had been. "Get some sleep, Suddy," Dominic said, turning his back on her to walk toward the front exit. "I'll call you when I find another mess." Suddy stood alone in the hum of the yellow light. She picked up the phone. It felt like a stone in her palm. She turned and walked out the back service doors, leaving the mop, the bucket, and her invisibility behind forever. A cheap lighter, a bottle of vinegar, and an eye for the dirt nobody else wanted to see. Suddy stepped out of the shadows to pay her rent, but she ended up exposing a massive cartel theft and catching the eye of the city's most dangerous man. Now she is no longer scrubbing floors. She is Dominic Rossi's secret weapon. But in a world where mistakes are paid for in blood, how long can she survive before she becomes the mess that needs cleaning?